Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for everyone for having me. I'm excited to talk about my research. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. All right. Can everyone see this? Thumbs up. Perfect.
Yep.
All right. So hello, my name is Chris Blume, and as Matt said, I am a graduate student at UMBC. That's the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And for my project, I am interested in using bats to monitor pollution in Baltimore City, as well as learn more about the biodiversity of the bats in Baltimore and where they are and what they can tell us about our ecosystem in our city. So to start off, who am I? Why am I here talking to you all today? So I actually started my career. I went to Rider University, and that's in New Jersey, and I studied biology. And I was interested in learning a little bit more about, I guess, wildlife, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do yet. So I went there, studied bio, see what I would find. From there, I went to University of Delaware so I could study more about wildlife conservation and ecology. That's when I was pretty convinced that that's what I wanted to do with my career. I wasn't sure on bats. I really wasn't sure what wildlife species I wanted to work with. But University of Delaware gave me the tools, the ideas that this is something that I could, potentially do with my career. So that's where I started that. So then after I graduated there, I did some field research to kind of get my feet wet, learning what it's like to be out in the field, studying wildlife. It's totally different from any other job I've had before. A lot more rewarding, a lot more thinking on your feet. Not everything goes according to plan, but there's nothing like it being out in the field and just working with wildlife. It's always changing. So that's something that I really liked. And a big component of this, as was said in the introduction, is I'm a member of the eye care program. So what that means is it's a program that one looks to bring or expand upon inclusion and diversity in the wildlife and environmental sector. It's been slow growing for the environmental sector and some of STEM, getting people of all different backgrounds into it. So this program was looking to bring that to the forefront. Also, it looked like it wanted to get in community engagement for science and for environmental studies. So Baltimore City seemed like a great place to get this kind of research going. So I started with the eye care program in the beginning of 2021 and at UMBC, and I'm finishing up now. So I'm excited to show you what I have so far. So again, here's some more pictures. So this picture all the way on the right, this is actually me before I even got started in bats. So after Rider University, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I loved animals. So I was like, man, maybe I'll be a vet tech. So I was a veterinary technician for about 3 years of my life, worked with cats and dogs and rabbits. And then at some point I moved on to non-human primates, so monkeys. I loved it, got to learn a lot of hands-on, but my love was being out in the field and working with wildlife outdoors. I really wanted to be outdoors. So at the University of Delaware, if you look up here, top middle, that's the best pick I have of me. I did beekeeping. I worked in the apiary and I learned how to be a beekeeper, how to work, again, with these, I guess some people don't consider them wildlife necessarily because they are in these beehives, but it was my first experience working with wildlife in this way or animals in this way. I enjoyed it, learned a lot, got stung so much, I would do it again in a heartbeat. After the University of Delaware, I took a field research job down at Chickasee Island, and I was studying 2 species of birds down there, salt marsh and seaside sparrows, 2 endangered species, mostly endangered based to sea level rise. So this picture is me collecting some data on some eggs that we had found. Again, this was like my real first experience going out into the field and really getting my hands dirty and running around, and I fell in love with it immediately. It's, again, you have to be adaptable. There's a lot going on. A lot can change in a moment's notice, but it's rewarding, it's fun, it's unpredictable. So keeping with that theme, I wanted to find a new species, something I hadn't worked with before, but that could also, something I was interested in. So this brings me over here to the left bottom. So actually the left top is the eye care program. So that's me over here on the right. and the other members of the first cohort for this program. They have been incredibly inspiring and helpful. They mean a lot to me. Really have helped me get through working through this whole process. It's really nice to have a team to like bounce ideas off of. And then finally, it's me with bats. So that's where I'm at now. This picture was actually taken at Rock Creek Park in DC. A lot of fun, love playing with bats, love catching them, love studying them. So I'll give you some more information about what I do. Here's an agenda. So I'm going to talk about my research goals. Why bats? Why am I studying bats? Not a lot of people do it, but I think there's a lot of value in studying bats. And I want to talk about the bats of Baltimore. Before starting this project, I wasn't even sure if there were bats in Baltimore. So going through, I want to give them the spotlight. I also want to talk about connecting with my community partners. This project wouldn't be possible without them. So I want to discuss a little bit how I did that. Then we'll talk about acoustic monitoring. That's a lot of fun, a lot of interesting stuff. Hopefully, I was having a little issue early on getting the calls to work, but hopefully I can show you all some calls I have and of some of the species as well and help identify that. And then we'll end with a Q&A and any questions you guys have, feel free to ask. Okay, so let me just make this smaller. Cool. All right. So when I came up with this research project, I had a lot of different ideas, a lot of different ways that this could go. But I came down with 4 ideas of what I wanted to look at studying bats in Baltimore City. So first, I wanted to look at the biodiversity of bats. Again, I didn't even know if the bats were here. They are. I wanted to see what bats are here in Baltimore and why it's those species. I also wanted to look at heavy metal contamination in urban ecosystems. I wanted to take the intersection between wildlife and humans and bring it together so we can learn something more about each of us, something more about our environment as well as our communities. So I also wanted to examine those levels of the pollution in Baltimore and see if they're impacting our human communities as well as our ecosystem. I also wanted to connect with community-based organizations and leaders to get their perspective about the issue. I'm not from Baltimore, so anything that I bring won't necessarily be seen the same way that people from this city, their understanding, the way that they might perceive it might be different. So I felt like it was only right to get their opinion on it, as well as give them this problem could impact them as well. So I wanted to get their insight, their understanding as I went through with this research. And then I wanted to share my environmental education with people and kind of create like a stewardship of urban ecology in Baltimore City. So events like this, and then in-person events like evening bat walks to get people excited and maybe learn something about wildlife that they might not think about in the city. Bats definitely didn't come first in my mind. So it's been fun to kind of showing people what's around. So what are heavy metals? So heavy metals are certain elements, metallic elements, and usually in small doses, they can be toxic and they can have health impacts to humans. So things like lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, chromium, those are the ones that I'm looking at in particular. One of the big reasons that they're potentially dangerous to humans is that they tend to bioaccumulate in organisms. Now, what does bioaccumulate mean? It means that through transmission, if that's eating or even contact, they can begin to build up in an organism. And over time, they don't necessarily get excreted the way that they need to. So then they build up over time and they can have health impacts to the organism that comes in contact with them. There's a lot of sources of these kind of contaminants, especially in urban areas. So things like industrial zones and traffic areas. Baltimore has a lot of vacant lots. And vacant lots can be a potential source of this depending on how those lots are handled or treated. Also, they can seep into the groundwater and into the soil, which was something interesting because that goes hand in hand with the vacant lots. A lot of these lots in Baltimore City are being used as community gardens, community farms, which is great. It's a great spot to get people like a green space, get people out into the environment, get people fed. But if these contaminants are going into the soil, we could be polluting our own people unknowingly. So I wanted to learn more about this issue. but I wanted to do it with the lens of wildlife. So that's basically the general theme of my project. Environmental justice is also a huge component of my project. So again, I'm tracking urban farms, and I want to see what environmental hazards are present and the likelihood that these metals are getting into the ground and into the soil and into the water, and then moving on to different communities where they're being distributed. Another thing, again, I said the vacant lots and these abandoned buildings could be a potential source of contamination. And that's because instead of being dismantled in like a very slow and deliberate way, they're usually just bulldozed and knocked over. And then anything like lead paint or any kind of metals can then seep into the ground over time. And then with that, they end up getting into our food or water. And that kind of starts the cycle all over again. And then once again, through bioaccumulation, so it builds up in the wildlife and in humans as well, these heavy metals, but they also magnify. So as you go up and up the trophic scale or the food web, these toxins also have a habit of not just building up, but they also magnify and become a little bit more potent each time as they're passed on. So this is all the things that are in my head. As I'm thinking about this project, I want to look at wildlife, but also want to bring in environmental justice and learn from these communities, as well as just find out how heavy metals are impacting us. So we'll move on to bats. They're like the star of the show. That's why everyone's here. I know it. So bats are actually the second largest order of mammals, second only to rodents. I've seen estimates from 1400, I've seen up to 1800. I'm going to stick with the 1400 because that seems more reasonable. Now in Baltimore, there's two different types of bats, at least on paper. This one way to divide them is microcryoptria, which means small, and then cryoptria, which is the scientific name of bats, means hand wing. So we have the small ones, and then we have megacryoptria, which are the large ones. Larger ones are the ones that you think of like fruit-eating bats or flying fox or ones in other countries. We don't have them here. Microcryoptera are the ones that we have here in Baltimore and really all around the US. And most of them are insectivores. They use echolocation to locate their prey. Much of the larger bats don't actually have this ability. They mostly eat fruit or things that they don't actually need echolocation to use. Some do, but most don't. But all the small ones do because they need it to capture their prey. And we'll get more into the echolocation and how that works exactly. So for the bats, they usually set up a summer roosting site. And this is a location that year after year, when they come out of hibernation, they're looking to return to. Around late November, depending on the species, maybe early December, they'll try to find like a location to hibernate. Some will leave, they'll migrate and leave completely. Some will go on the ground. Some will try to find a cave. In the cities, they try to find like an abandoned building or again, these vacant lots or your attic. But they'll try to find like a nice, warm, cozy place to hibernate into the spring. Usually, again, a man-made structure. And then they'll hibernate from December until about mid-March. And then mid-March, they'll begin to emerge again. And then those structures, the summer roost that they had to use before, they'll emerge and they'll try to use those structures again. So that doesn't really answer the question, I guess. Why bats? Well, bats make excellent biomonitors. That's what we're going to call bats from now on. So they're biomonitors. So they're living organisms that have adapted to the ecosystem that give us information about our health and the health of the ecosystem. And they're great at this. They're urban adapters. One of my favorite things to say is that bats will use like street lights to hunt, which I think is really cool that bats have changed their behavior around humans to live in these areas, places that are usually dominated by human behavior. So bats are urban adapters, so they live in close proximity to us, meaning that any kind of toxins or things that we might come in contact with, bats are also being exposed to as well. So that's number one. They forage, they drink, their roosting behavior, again, they're all in close connection to us. So a lot of the insects, a lot of the mosquitoes, the beetles that they eat come from water and soil sources that might be contaminated. Therefore, the bats eat them, and any kind of contamination that was picked up from the insects will move up into the bats. So that makes them great as biomonitors, and that's why I wanted to look at them in particular. Also, I feel like bats kind of get a bad rap. Not a lot of people know a lot about them. And the first thing you think of is disease, or they're going to drink your blood, or numerous things. I didn't know a lot about bats, but I knew that for the most part that's not true, and I wanted to learn more about them. Also, not a whole lot is understood about how bats are adapting to urbanization. Again, they are urban adapters, but our growth, human anthropogenic changes, have been moving faster than they can adapt. So I wanted to see how they are handling this change. And finally, bat populations have been on decline for a number of reasons: habitat loss, disease. So again, I felt the need to research them was great. So I wanted them to get the time that they needed. All right, so these are the bats of Baltimore. So there's 6 species that have been previously surveyed in the city of Baltimore. So as I know it of right now, I think I'm the second person to do any kind of monitoring in the city itself. Now, in Maryland, there are 10 different species, but in Baltimore City, as of right now, we know of 6. So we have the big brown bat, which is by far the most common. If you ever look up at night in the spring or summer and you see a bat flying around, it's this good chance it's going to be a big brown bat. We have little brown bat. We also have the hoary bat, which is the fellow right here, over here on the right. He's my favorite bat. He has like a great, like almost like a mane with that silver hair. He's like a very attractive bat. By far my favorite that we have here. And then we have the tricolored bat, we have the silver hair bat, and we have the red bat that's sitting right here over here on the left. Cool thing about the red bat is that during the day, where most bats might find a structure to hide in, eastern red, not so much. So if you're ever on a walk or you're just hanging out outside, if you pay attention, you might be able to see an eastern red. They mostly just hang out underneath foliage or on a branch or on a leaf. So they're very easy to spot, that bright red color. So yeah, definitely keep an eye out. Where again, the other bats might try to find somewhere else to hide out of like prying eyes. These bats are usually front and center out there. So maybe take a look. So to give you guys an idea of where I was situated, so in Baltimore City, I had about 41 different sites. So finding bats in a city is not easy. So the way I thought of it is I wanted to monitor for bats. I wanted to see where bats are. And most of the spots that I monitored were based on previous interactions with people. So people like, hey, I saw bats here, I saw bats there, or yes, I have bats in my backyard. I would put up an acoustic monitor so I can collect data about what bats and how they're using the area if they were there. If they were, I would then try to go and find the actual roosting site of the bats. That would help me collect guano. And again, I would be able to find out which bats are staying where. I also decided that another great way of doing this is I can just set up bat boxes with the hope that I might not have to go search. So if I put up a bat box at a location that has bat activity, the hope was that at some point bats would move in and then I would know exactly where to go instead of searching. It didn't happen as much as I had hoped, but I did get some great interactions. So I also wanted to spread out across Baltimore so that I can get like a good matrix of the city to understand where heavy metal pollution is and also which parts of Baltimore are being impacted the most by which toxins, as well as which bats are found in each place. So I have a couple of spots down like Southwest. That's Patuxent. I have some at Patapsco because I found some bats there. And that's nice to compare what I'm seeing in more rural areas to urban areas. Then I have a lot of spots like up north and mid, and then I have some spots down in like Brooklyn and Curtis Bay, South Baltimore, to kind of get like a rounded opinion. Again, so overall, I got about 22 sites that gave me no guano, but I did get acoustic monitoring from. 17 sites that provided me with guano, which was fantastic. The more guano I was able to get, the better. I'll explain more exactly why guano. Guano is bat poop, for those that don't know. And I'll explain why I'm using bat poop as a method of looking at pollution. And in green, I put up a monitor and I didn't put up a bat box, and I didn't find any roost or anything like that. So this is what my scale of my research project looked like, and I'll explain a little bit more. So again, another big component of my project was community outreach. I think it was probably the most fun part of my project was taking people from all over the city and just talking to them about bats. So this picture is one of my favorite because this kid was so much fun to talk to. That's me holding an acoustic monitor. And we would just go set these up and just take a hike in the woods. And it was an opportunity for me to talk about my project, not get super nitty gritty into the details, but we're just looking for bats and had fun. Um, I was able to connect with over 20 organizations, and that included outreach, so holding events and talking to people, as well as setting monitors and setting up bat boxes. And that gave me the opportunity to spread this research and this knowledge about the problem, as well as my potential solution, or at least my potential way of studying it with well over 1,500 people through these connections. So another way that I decided to do it is also I wanted to do an educational program. So bat boxes, that was one way of doing it as well. So I would go out and I would have workshops where people can come and get a bat box for free and we can build them, and I can explain how to build them and set them up around Baltimore. Again, that helps with the biodiversity. So it lets people come and they can, I guess, grow their own stewardship. Because it's one thing to take people out in the woods and say, hey, bats are here, but if they can bring it home or, to their place and use it as an educational tool, I thought that was really important. So it was a way, again, to connect people with the urban ecosystem and the biodiversity that they might not know about, might not think about, or it's just a fun thing to do on the side that was just helping bats. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about my guano sampling. So again, guano means poop. And for bat biology, bats will go and they eat so many insects, so many. They're a big part of like our agriculture and pest control. The amount of money that we save on pest control and pesticides because of bats is huge. Again, though, those insects that bats eat will come out of water and soil sources that could be contaminated with these heavy metals that I wanted to look at. Now, for the most part, if you're looking at toxicological data in mammals like bats, a lot of time they take an organ. So maybe they'll take like a brain, or they might take a kidney, or like a wing puncture. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something similar. I wanted to get similar data without being invasive. Bats are already struggling as is, especially in urban areas. We don't know much about them, but again, due to disease and habitat loss, it just felt counterproductive to then go and these creatures that I'm studying to also like kill them. So I looked up to see what other ways I can do this, and guano from the bits of insects that they leave behind would give me similar data. Same thing with fur samples. So hair, fur, and guano all provide similar data in ways. So these are some ways that you can do it. You can find like a roosting site in a bridge or a cave and put down mats for when the bats fly by, they will drop it. You can also, for me, if they were in a bat box, I had little kind of insert tools that I can put in that allow the bats to go up, and then they could do their business, and then I can come back and not disturb them and take them out. So again, I wanted to be as non-invasive as possible with doing this kind of research, but also provide the same data because it impacts our community and it impacts our ecosystem. So I wanted to be thorough without being invasive. So another thing that I did, again, I wanted to look at biodiversity. So acoustic monitoring was a big part of my project, and also a lot of fun. So this is some of the acoustic equipment. This is what I would call a passive bat monitor. And what acoustic monitors are they take the ultrasonic echolocation signals that a bat gives off when they're hunting, or if they're being social, or if they're just navigating. It collects those sounds using microphones, usually some kind of ultrasonic microphone. And then it takes it, and then it allows you later on to then look, and you can identify bats based on their call. Now, for the most part, bats, their echolocation can't be heard by humans. It's a higher frequency than we can listen to. But these devices will capture it with the microphone, and then you can go back, and it makes it audible in a way that you can look and you can tell exactly if the bat was hunting, if it was maybe looking for water, if it was doing a social call. So I've set up these monitors all around Baltimore to capture all the different sounds Again, you can, with time and effort, you can go through and you can actually identify the species of bat based on the calls. Um, it can be a little tedious, but it's fun when you get a call and you're listening and you can actually see like, oh, this bat here is like flying and here it is, it must have found something and it's attacking. um, so these monitors were fun. So this is one type. This is a passive one. So this is me setting up a passive monitor on a tree. The little nub on the front of it is a microphone, and you can get different types of microphones. This one looks like it's a unidirectional one, so it only branches out in one direction. So for this, I would want to have it set up in a way that it would be facing like an opening or a clearing. So as the bats fly through, that can capture their sounds without any kind of interference as they come in front of the monitor. And then again, I can come back later at a later time and I can look at the sound, the shape, the duration, the frequency to hopefully ID some of these bats. And I'll show you some of the calls in a little bit. Again, so these, I usually let these set up at a location for maybe 4 to 5, maybe a week, depending on if I got a lot of activity. You let them set up for a couple of evenings and then you come back, kind of like set and forget, just come back, pick it up, and then you just plug it in to see what calls you got. The other ones, which are, I think, a lot more fun, are the active monitorings. So these, like the one that you see here, attached to the phone, it's a little plug-in, and then in real time, you can walk around, you can hang outside, and you can actually listen to the bats in real time. And they're pretty cheap, so they're great for like anyone that's a researcher like myself, or if you're just into like, it's a hobby of yours, ecological education. So at this picture was taken at one of my bat walks that I have, an evening bat walk. So we were getting ready, we set this up in the phone, and then you can listen to the bats in real time as they come out. And the cool thing about these is that they normally identify the bats for you as they come. So for a lot of the stuff that I normally do, I have to go through and then manually vet each call to see what species it is. This here, it takes the call in and then it, based on your location, will say, hey, it's probably this species of bat, or no, it's this species here. So again, it's great for if you're just like hanging out during the summer and want to see what's like bats are hanging around, or if you're doing research, it's great. And these are a lot cheaper. So the ones that go on your phone, they usually range from about like maybe $200. More high-end ones could be thousands, but yeah, there's some cheaper ones that maybe like $100 or so. So this brings up citizen science. What citizen science is, it's research that's conducted by members of the community. So me as a researcher, and me connecting with community groups all around Baltimore, I also wanted to get community involved. I felt like I had something fun, something interesting, something that we could all learn from, but I couldn't do it alone. So I wanted to kind of embrace citizen science. So I wanted to get the public out and excited about it. It also gives people that aren't experts an opportunity to get involved, gain the experience that they might not get otherwise, maybe find something that they're into, and also kind of lead the project in their own way, or at least in some way have like a part of growing the project. A lot from what I've seen, citizen science has been great for projects that are in like medicine, public health, zoology, ecology. There's a lot of, if you go online, there are websites that you can use that you could be part of like a citizen science project. So yeah, that's part of what my project is as well, especially with the bat calls. I wanted to take a lot of the calls that I have and show people, hey, like this call came from North Baltimore, or this one's more like in the harbor, or this one's South Baltimore. So people kind of get an idea of where bats in their like their neighborhood are. And I think it makes it a lot more fun building a community around research. So for mine, there's a lot of different ones that you can use. So the size starter, for me, I use a platform called Zooniverse to help with the project. I named my project Rhythms of the Night. I thought that was a clever one. With help of people from my lab, we came up with that name. And what I do is I take all the calls that I get from Baltimore City and I put them on this website. And then people that are interested can come on later and they can just take 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, take as long as you want. and then you can help me identify the calls. Now, I did have a bit of an issue getting the website working today. It's been kind of hit or miss, but I'm going to put the link down into the chat. And yeah, if it's not up today or tomorrow, hopefully it'll be up again soon, because it's a fun way of just listening to see what bats are around Baltimore City. And hopefully, again, we know of 6 species right now. I'm hoping to grow on that and maybe get maybe a couple more, 1 or 2 more. And this also trains people on how to identify, because it can be kind of tedious. It's not natural. There are a lot of overlap between the bats, but there is like a training and a field guide that I use to help people become more familiar with what we're trying to identify. So I guess with this, I should say what echolocation is. I'm talking so much about echolocation, but maybe you don't know what it is. An echolocation is basically a frequency, a sound that bats will emit when they're flying, and they use it for navigation, but they also use it for hunting. And the idea is that these sound waves go out and then they return. And with that, they can basically create an image of what they're flying around. So if they're insects, if there's some kind of barrier or obstacle, or even water, bats can emit this sound and they get an image of where it is. And then if they're looking to hunt, they can zone in quicker on it. Again, these echolocations normally aren't heard by humans. Depending on the species, some species, their range just falls into the human range. Big brown bats kind of like that. Not always, but a lot of the other species aren't. But with certain tools like the monitors I have, you can identify them. So I also wanted to show this. Yes, bats are beautiful. The echolocation comes from specialized like nose and mouth organs. And I just wanted to show the diversity of some of these species. We got like horseshoe nose bats, and we got other species here. This might be like a leaf cutter. But yeah, so each of these different species like have different organs or different like situation of their nose and mouth that helps with the echolocation. And this helps not only send out the calls, but kind of guide and direct it when it comes back, so they get a better feel for it. Also down here on the left, I thought it was so cool that like just the different shapes of their nose can cause, I guess, like vary different kind of echolocations coming out depending on how they're using it. So I thought that was neat, and I just wanted to show off the diversity of the bats. None of these species are here, unfortunately, so we don't have any like grotesque or like weird looking bats like this. For the most part, ours just look like little dogs, but I thought this was cool elsewhere, the different diversity of like these organs. So bats will give a call on a short range of frequency, and this helps them identify where the object or their prey, like how far it is from them. So usually the bats will give out like a little high to low call. And this broad band of a call will help to identify, it kind of gauges the distance that the prey or the object is. So over here on the top, usually the bat will give out like 1 or 2 clicks, and that's usually considered like a search phase. So what that means is the bat's like giving a click and see if it finds anything in return. And again, this is in milliseconds, so this happens really, really quick. Then at some point it finds something, so it starts clicking out a little bit more as it approaches to get a good idea of the orientation of the object or prey again. And then if it's going for prey, if it's hunting, as it gets closer, it'll click more and more and more to make sure it's getting closer and closer until it finds what it wants and it captures it. So here you can kind of, on the image on the right, you can kind of make out that this is a lot of the approach and the capture phase here, not so much of a search, but it found something and it's giving out these calls, these pulses in a very short interval so that it can then find exactly where it is and catch it. And that's how bats normally hunt. So more about the acoustics. So I use a program called Anabat Insight. The company itself is called Anabat, and I think it's a free download. So using this software then allows me to visualize exactly what a bat call looks like. So this is what it looks like when it's captured from the machine and it comes into my computer. So this up here, these colors the more yellow, the more bright it is, the more power the bat is putting into it. So it's putting a lot of emphasis on the call as it's coming. And this kind of also gives a shape of how I guess not only just the power, but the distance that the call is going. And then here at the bottom, these yellow ticks, or it's a different way of visualizing it. So not always, depending on the microphone that you have, it might not come up as like a bright pulse like the spectrogram, but it might come up in these images where you can still get the clicks, but it comes out differently. I like to use them both ways because it shows me the emphasis that the bat's putting at different parts of the call, but then the bottom also lets me see visually the calls come in. And this is mostly what I use to identify the bats that I catch. And it makes it more accurate when I'm trying to identify what species it is, because the shape and the speed and duration that the calls come out is very important to identifying the species that I'm looking at. So again, I think I touched on most of this, but the spectrogram itself, I think it's beautiful when you get like a nice call that came in, because you get all these bright colors, these purples and these yellows, and it just, again, shows you how much emphasis the bat's putting into each burst. And then different parts of the call that I look at are, I guess, clues to help me identify the species that I've actually recorded and make like a more accurate assumption or identification of the species that I'm looking at. So some of the things that I just set up like a bat call or a bat monitor. I just took it down, I'm looking at it. So if I'm trying to identify, there are certain things that are going through my head as I try to make the identification of the call. So first thing is local species. So which species do we know of that exist in the area that I'm looking at? Because there is overlap, even though you can identify, there is a lot of overlap between the species, the bat calls between different bat species. So if you can just narrow it down. So again, in Baltimore, I know that there's probably 6, maybe 7 species it could be. So that helps me take out a lot of the guesswork instead of looking at bats that could be in Delaware or bats that could be in Virginia or elsewhere. So I'm looking at these 6 or 7. Then the first thing you want to look at, and I'll show this again because I'm actually going to show some calls, but you want to look at the minimum frequency. So certain bats can only get their frequency down so far. So I want to look at the minimum frequency first to see how low they dropped it, and that helps me identify what bat it is. Then once I have the minimum, I want to look at how high, how many kilohertz up the call actually went. So I would look down here. This one's about like 40 kilohertz, and then it goes up to a little bit above 70. So I'm like, okay, so there's only a certain number of bats that are in that range. Then also the duration. So I have this stretched out in this image, but a bat call usually only lasts like maybe 2 or 3 seconds, these pulses. But each one of these is a couple milliseconds. And from that, certain bats, they might elongate their call or their calls might be shorter. So I can use that to identify as well. Then something we call call bounce. And what that is if when a bat gives out a call, usually the bat, like in this one, they're very uniform. They look the same. They're at the same frequency, the same minimum, and they go up to about the same. But in other bat species, their call might vary, might go up, might go down. So it might drop down to like 30, then it might drop back up to 45 and then back down. So sometimes there's bounce, and that bounce in the calls, that variation could help you identify what bat species it is. And again, total number of pulses. I usually like to have, like this one here is about 15 to 20. I think that's a good one to try to make a assumption or make a identification on a bat. If I only had like 5 to 10, I might not have enough information to make a definitive call. But the more calls you have, the more pulses you have, the better. And then also the shape. So this one here, some of these are more vertical. Some of these have this kind of like swoop to it. And that's definitely something that helps identify this swoop. Certain bats, like the big brown bat, they usually have a swoop like that. Or an eastern red might have like a more vertical call. So looking at that, looking at the context, along with the different phases of the call, helps me identify what species I could be looking at any time. And then, so again, I wanted to compare. So this one here on the bottom left is what I would call a big brown bat call. It has like a swoop. Its frequency, it's hard to see here, but it's around 30 and it goes up to about 60. That's usually where big brown bat's call usually lies. It's steady throughout, there's no real bounce, and it has that J swoop, which is very classic for a big brown bat. So that's how I would go out and be like, all right, so this is probably a big brown bat call. On the right, it's an eastern red call, and their range is kind of different. It goes up to 28 to 43. So these here are close to like 40. There's a little bit of bounce here. So this call is not as like uniform as the rest. So there could be some bounce. They can also have the swoop, but also some of them could be vertical. So it kind of depends as you're like looking through. There's different things that like different traits that you need to look at as you're trying to identify some of the bats. So the one thing I haven't said, ironically, is the actual call themselves. So the noises that themselves are very nice and very pretty and like really cool when you get like a nice call from a bat. But in terms of identifying the species, it doesn't really help as much as the actual visualization of the call. So I think, let me see if I can share. I'm going to show some calls from around Baltimore that I have. So this one is down. This is from a big brown bat. And this was at Filbert Street Community Garden. If anyone knows where that's at, that's like down in South, like near Brooklyn or Curtis Bay. So if you're looking at this, and the fun thing about this is you can kind of zoom in and make the calls bigger. You can kind of see that this down here, the shape of the call. So it has this very long shape. The duration is long. This one here is about 27 milliseconds. So it takes some time. This here, this program tells you what the Fmin and Fmax is. So this Fmax is about 30, and then, Fmin is about 30, and it goes up to 50. And that usually stays pretty uniform throughout the call. And then I can zoom out to get a better image of the whole call. And then I want to see if I can't do it from here. But looking at the call, based on the shape, the size, the duration, the number of calls, that's like an easy one to say that's probably like a big brown bat at the location. And then I want to see if I can play it. I don't know if you'll be able to hear, but this is what it sounds like. Hopefully it's not too loud. I don't know if that's playing. I'm gonna try one more. Let's see. All right, so this is another call. This is a big brown, a eastern red call. And this one has some bounce if you're looking at the calls themselves. So the calls aren't necessarily uniform. They like stay here and then they bounce up and then they drop back down. You can see the shape. This one does have that kind of swoop to it, but it might not be as defined and not as long as the ones that we saw in the big brown. And then they kind of drop down and they go back up. So based on that, these clues that the bats give me are things that I use to identify the bats as an eastern red or a big brown. And that's how you would normally identify it. Now on the website I have, this information is all laid out and it has like a little field guide that you can go through and you can connect what you're seeing in the call to what you might think like how to identify the bat. And then let me see if I can play this one. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm not sure if you guys were able to hear that, but
yeah, we can hear it.
Oh, perfect. Okay, cool.
It sounds like synthesizer music from the 80s.
I'm happy that it actually came through because that's the most fun. It doesn't tell you a lot about the bat itself, but the call, I'll play it one more time because I think it's neat. It's a little muted, but that's what they sound like. So then going through, you get the call and then you can go through and identify it. So I'm gonna go back to this. Okay. So in conclusion, I wanted to address that I think bats are a vital part of our ecosystem. I think that there's a lot that we can learn from bats and the information that they give us. I feel like there are some misconceptions or maybe there isn't as much interest in bats as there are in other species, but I think the ecosystem services that they provide, as well as the information that we can learn about our city and our ecosystem and our own health is interesting. And I think that community-based ecological stewardship, like such as like providing bat boxes or even going out on bat walks and learning about what species and the biodiversity of bats around the city could be beneficial to learning more about us as well as our ecosystem as well. So I wanted to open it up to questions. I'm going to stop the share. And feel free to ask any questions.
We've had a few that came in on the chat while you were talking, and I can just address a few of those. An interesting question here. Can the bats' prey hear the sounds that they're making?
So that's a good one. For the most part, most of the insects like mosquitoes and some of the beetles can't. However, there are some insects that have adapted to bats using echolocation that have actually found a way to deter bats with their own echolocation. So I think there are certain species of moths that can recognize that, like hear the echolocation of bats, and that they can actually send out their own call that can deter bats from attacking, which I thought was super interesting. I don't know exactly what species of moth it is. I don't know if it's around here, but I thought that was really cool that some species can, and we'll use it against them to stop the attack.
Tiger moths.
Is that what it is?
Yep. I don't know if they're local or not, though. I don't think so.
That's so cool.
And then we had a couple of questions about the material, like the materials that you found in the guano, which heavy metals, and then questions about the equipment that you're using.
Yeah, so I'll address the guano one first. So right now I'm currently going through like finishing up my season, writing my thesis on what I'm finding. I don't have all the data yet ready. I'm hoping that I can like finish this up and then maybe come back and talk about it. I don't want to say exactly which ones because I don't know. I don't have it all like laid out yet and what the thresholds were. Hopefully soon. And then I would like to come back and maybe disseminate the knowledge that I figured out or what I found or what communities are being impacted by which ones. I know I have had some heavy metals pop up, so like lead and mercury, but I don't know exactly, I can't say exactly what concentration, if it's in a threshold that is high enough that of concern. But hopefully soon. And hopefully I'll be able to see it as well over time. So I have some guano from like earlier in the season, and I'd be interested in seeing how over a field season guano can change, or sorry, heavy metal contamination can grow based on this bioaccumulation and biomagnification in bats.
Awesome. So here's a few other, there's several other questions, and we'll try to address as many as we can, I guess. I'm interested in this question. Do individual bats have a unique call? Can you like identify individual bats from their call?
That's a good question. I don't believe so. I think that for the most part, so bats themselves are very social animals. So within a roost, bats would be able to identify themselves. But if I had as if like, does a bat have a voice? If I captured a bat and kept recording, would I get the same call? I don't think so, but I can't say for sure because I've never had the same bat over and over and over again. That would be really cool to find out. But in terms of species, I believe that you can find the same species based on the call, but individuals, I'm not so sure.
So then there's a couple of other questions, but I also want to address this issue of citizen science, which you mentioned a couple of times. Is that program still ongoing? And can you talk a little bit more about how folks can participate?
Yeah, so it is ongoing. It's been great. So through the website, normally what my process is going out again and putting up the monitors themselves at locations around the city. And then my hope is to get people interested, not just in Baltimore or not just in Maryland, but anywhere that just want to go online and help me identify the bat calls. So what I do is I take the bat calls that I get from the monitors and I put them on this website. I get a lot of calls that I can't go through all by myself. So the idea was to have people help me see what species we have, maybe also identify some species that we haven't seen yet in Baltimore. It's still like a very young program or project. So I think there's a lot of room to grow. I'm also wanted to kind of be a community where people interested in the biodiversity of bats can kind of join together and kind of talk about what bats they're seeing, what calls they have, and then go from there. So yeah, it's ongoing. Again, I was having some problems with the website. It's not my platform. So once I have it back up, I think I'll put the link back up in it again in the chat, and just keep it posted or keep it like bookmarked and come back. And if it's up, then you can start like identifying the calls. Again, it's a bit of a process, but I do have some learning tools on the website itself that people can go, they can connect to get it running, or sorry, to identify the bats.
Great. So you're going to put that in the chat again.
Yeah, I'm grabbing it right now.
And someone else has asked about bat boxes. I also have a bat box in my yard. It's been up there for about 2 years. As far as I can tell, no bats have shown any interest. Although I have heard bats. I think I know why. I think it's too close to power lines, but that's neither here nor there. Any advice for people who are interested in putting up bat boxes to attract them?
Yeah, so if you need bat boxes, I can definitely be your hookup for it. I still have some bat boxes. I gave out a lot over the spring and summer. I also set them up at people's house and location. Anyone that's interested, I still have a couple. So I love to help you set them up. I would say in terms of where to set them up. So for me, I was in the city. A lot of my locations were in the city. So normally you wouldn't put a bat box on like a house, on the side of a house. At least that's what they tell a lot of people, because there's the idea that predators like raccoons and other things could get up in there, and you don't want that. So normally like a house, sorry, I said that wrong. You don't want to put it on a tree. A house is fine. But a tree, you don't want to put it up there because predators, things like birds or raccoons can get to it easier. So if you put it on the side of a building, like a house, or if you put it on a pole, maybe like in a garden or, off on your property, you can have it facing south or east. So it gets the proper amount of sunlight that it needs. And about 10 to 15 feet up off the ground might be your best bet. And that's usually what I've done. Again, I've had some success. It might take a couple of seasons for the bats to get in. And the reason for that is because bats give birth usually around in the summer. So like maybe June, July. And then the idea is that those baby bats would then, after about a month, they would leave the roost, the parents' roost that they're in, and they would go establish their own colonies. And then those are the colonies that they would use. So it might take a couple of seasons for bats to use it. But again, you could use like the side of a building, the side of a barn, side of your house, maybe even a pole if that's possible, and set it up about 10 to 15 feet up off the ground and have it set south or east. And that will give it the proper amount of sunlight they have to keep the bats comfortable.
Perfect. I don't know how many more questions you want to address here, Chris. There's several of them. I'm going to just kind of like bounce through a few and you can decide what you want to talk about. You mentioned that bats have adapted to the urbanization of Baltimore and are using streetlights to their advantage. Can you explain how they're using streetlights?
Yeah, I guess I didn't touch on that. I always like say it and then like I didn't like really get into it. So I think it's cool. So insects like moths and mosquitoes are obviously drawn to things like streetlights. And the fact that bats have picked up on this and have used it to their advantage as hunting grounds, I think is really neat. And that's just one of the ways that bats have adapted to human occupied areas. And then there's other ways. Again, they live in our attics. They'll move into old buildings. They'll use farms and like gardens as hunting grounds as well. But I always thought it was really unique that something like so, I guess, mundane, something that we see everywhere in the city, a street light, could provide a opportunity for bats to adapt their behavior. And they know that this is a hunting place where insects will gather. So that's a place that they go.
Nice. And then this might be kind of technical. So you said that a bat makes an image from the echolocation. Do you mean that the sound information gets switched into a visual part of the brain? Is this more of a metaphor? Does the bat have a special part of its brain that puts together the echo information?
That's a really good question. How do I answer this? I want to say it's an image. I believe that the bats, so bats can see. That's one thing that we do know. So I know a lot of people like bats are blind, but they're not. They can see. But the echolocation, that ping that goes out, gives them an image that they can then go after. And they're like, all right, so this is the distance and this is what I'm looking at. This is the size as well. So I don't know if it necessarily switches over in their brain and becomes like this like visual image that they're now seeing before them, but it gives them the information that they need to know, that distance, size, shape, and movement of what they're seeing. So I don't know if that like necessarily answered the question, if they're actually seeing like seeing something visualized before them, but it does provide them the information. So I guess it's not necessarily an image. It just gives them that there's something there that might be not as easily seen, but it's better to get that, I guess, that metaphor of an image so they know where it's at.
There's a old philosophy text called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat" by Thomas Nagel. It's like about the impossibility of bridging the gap between our way of perceiving the world and that of another species like a bat. So we say an image, who knows? That's that was actually a very helpful explanation. There's a few others here. So first of all, if we wanted to follow up with you, like there's a person asking if you do presentations at schools, and if we wanted more information about how to share our data with you, if we have bat boxes and things, there you go. There's your email in the chat.
Yeah,
Perfect.
feel free to hit me with an email. I'm always on my email. So I do presentations at school. I do bat walks. So kids seem to love them. So I usually bring those monitors that I have, and then we set it up. I talk about what I do. I take kids out, or anyone that wants to come out, and then we wait for the bats, and then everyone can like listen, put their phones or their monitors to the sky, and they can get a good listen to what species we have around.
Sweet. And I'm not sure if we actually talked about what specific kind of acoustic monitor you're using or what you would recommend.
No, let me see. So this one here, I'll show you this one. So this here is called the Anabat Chorus. I wonder if I can throw the link in here as well. Let's see. Sharing. I'm going to throw. So this is from Titley Scientific, Anabat. This is the one I use for getting the actual vocalizations of the calls. So some of them don't actually, the microphone as well as the monitor will take the call, but they won't actually give you the sound. I like to have the sound. I think the sound's great, and it's a lot of fun when you can actually listen to the bat calls. So this is one of the ones that I use to actually get the call, the monitor. The microphone actually is here on the side. I don't know if you can see that. So I'll set this up on a tree for a couple of days, and this is one of the ones I use for that. And I'm going to put the link here. So I have about 2 of these, and then I don't have one next to me, but same company. They make a different kind of monitor. I think it's called the Anabat Scout, and that's the one that I use to collect the data. It doesn't necessarily give you the sounds, but it gives you the shapes and it gives you the calls and something called zero cross, which basically just is a visualization of the data without the calls itself. Yeah.
Awesome.
Chris,
Thank you.
this is Tanel. I'm the field trip coordinator for the Natural History Society. You say you put your monitor up in a tree for a couple days. Typically, like how long does it take for you? Does it have to be a couple days, or can it be like a couple hours, or how long does it take for you to, I guess, like catch the sound waves, or like does it take a few days for it to, I guess, accumulate many sounds?
No, so you can, like if I put it up on a night, I'll probably get calls that night. I have plenty of times like put up a bat or a monitor during the day and I get calls, but usually I have them scattered around the city. So I like to get as many as I can at one time. So it could be a couple of days. I usually set it up for like the hours. I'll set it up for like 7 o'clock at night till about 6 in the morning. So those 12 hours, it'll be scanning for calls. And then again, I usually set it up for about 4, maybe 5 days, just so that it can gather as much data as possible before I have to like take it back and change the batteries. And I can start going through that data because in a night, I can get maybe 100, 200 calls. depending on what species or the activity. So I could leave them up as long as the batteries will last, but I would get a lot of calls I need to go through. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem. I also wanted to show this. This was the other monitor. This is from a company called Wildlife Acoustics. It's the Echometer Touch 2. Again, I think this one is about, I want to say anywhere between 150 and 200. It has like a little knob here. This one goes for an iPhone, but you can get it with an attachment for it, like an Android. And this is the one that if you're just hanging out outside during the summer and want to see what bats are around, you can plug it into your phone and it'll collect the calls. It gives you great sound quality for it, and it tells you what species it is. So yeah, wanted to also throw that out there as well.
I need one of those. I know there's a specific kind of bat in my yard, and I feel, was it the red bat that you said was low enough that humans can actually hear it? I
So
feel like
normally
it's that because I hear a high-pitched squeaking sometimes when it's going through.
it might be the big brown. Big
Okay.
brown, you can definitely hear some of the squirrels sometime. I did see a question about white nose syndrome.
White nose, yes. Sorry, I was going to get to that. My bad.
No, you're fine.
Thank
I
you.
always love talking about white nose syndrome. So white nose syndrome, for those that don't know, it's a fungus that was found in New York in like, I think it was like 2006. And what it does, they believe that spelunkers might have gotten to one of the caves and with this parasite or this fungus that was initially in Europe, but they might have accidentally brought it over. And what it does is it then infects bats and it leaves this fuzzy white nose. It gives them, hence the name white nose syndrome. And it causes them to wake up out of hibernation. So it affects bats that hibernate. And when they wake up out of hibernation, bats need to eat. Their metabolism is fast. That's why they eat so many insects. So bats wake up out of their hibernation. They need to eat. But for the most part, they're waking up usually during the winter when they should be hibernating and there's no food sources around. So they starve and they die, or they dehydrate and they die. It's very efficient at wiping out roosting spots all around Baltimore, or not just Baltimore, but all around the United States. So roosting sites have been decimated. Bat populations have declined greatly due to it. Last I heard, it might have made itself west as far as New Mexico. And yeah, some colonies have been totally wiped out by it. So I think that setting up bat boxes is a great way of, it's very, what's the word? It spreads easily, communicable between bats. So setting up bat boxes is a better way of giving bats different varied places to live instead of all being in the same spot. Now, again, when they do go back to their winter roosting site, they might spread it, but it's a problem that right now they're looking at. But I think setting up habitat for bats is a great way of kind of hopefully slowing the spread of it.
So are there certain species that prefer different kinds of bat boxes? Is it like a one size fits all situation?
So I think it's a one size fit all. I haven't seen any bat boxes that are set up in particular for a certain species. I also haven't seen multiple species of bats in one bat box. So if I have a bat box that's being occupied by big brown bats, I've only seen just big brown bats there. But I set up bat boxes with any species in mind that want to use it. Again, I haven't seen them. Yeah, I think it's one size fits all for the bats.
That was awesome, Chris. Thank you. Any other questions, folks? Janelle, you're muted. Were you saying something?
Oh, I said I would like, this can go off the record, but how about we can get some bat walks on the books for some field trips for us? But we can talk about that later.
I'm going to stop the recording. We'll wrap this up, folks. Thank you all. I appreciate everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.